Hi, I'm Adam and I'm recording this video on chesswithcanaric.com. Today we're going to be discussing a common idea in endgames in order to create a passed pawn and win the game. So let's have a look at this first position. At first glance, this position looks very equal. Both sides have 5 pawns, 3 on the queen side and 2 on the king side. And it looks like both kings are close enough to the center and all the pawns are well defended. If white's knight could get into a square like c8, then this would be very promising as we would be attacking the a7 pawn. However, all of white's knight's entry squares are covered by black's pieces. So at first glance it looks like not much will happen in this endgame. White might play like g4, capture, capture, king up, and this looks like at first glance like it could be a draw very quickly. However, white actually has a winning idea in this position. So I invite you to pause the video and try to find white's winning idea. So the move in this position is actually knight takes b6. And at first this move looks very unusual because we're just sacrificing our knight on the b6 square where black's pawn can just take it back. However, the idea here is that because white's a pawn is so far advanced up the board, actually when this pawn moves away from a7, we're going to be very, very close to queening the pawn. So after a takes b6 and a7, there's actually no way for black's bishop or king to stop the pawn from queening, so this would be very easily winning. And if black ignores the knight and instead plays a move like bishop c7, now we can play knight c8, attacking the pawn. If bishop b6, we would take us and get the exact same idea where the pawn would promote. And after bishop b8, we simply play b6, captures, and a7. And after bishop takes, knight takes, we're up a full piece for a pawn, and this endgame should be very easily winning, as our knights will dominate the pawns. So it's important to note, before we go on to the next example, that the only reason this tactic works, and the only situations it will work, are a few situations. So the first thing is if black's bishop could stop the pawn from queening, then this idea wouldn't work. So for example, if this bishop was on, let's say this bishop was on c2, for example, and we played knight b6 now, after a b6 and a7, black can play bishop e4 check, and after our king moves, black is covering the queening square. So this bishop covers a8. So now we actually won't be able to queen, and black is just up a piece and will probably win the game. Another thing that we have to have in the position in order for this to work is our pawn has to be far enough up the board. So for example, if we move this whole setup back more into our position, now knight takes b4 wouldn't make so much sense because our pawn is going to be so slow to queen that black can very easily stop us with their bishop, or sometimes with their king. So it only works if black's pieces can't stop the pawn from promoting, and if our pawn is close enough to promote quickly. So okay, let's look at another example. So this is a slightly more complicated example, but the same idea. So it's important to note that if white didn't have a winning idea here, this endgame would actually be very easily winning for black, as white's king is tied down to the defense of the c2 pawn, and black's king is going to enter the position and take our pawns. So I invite you again to pause the video and try to come up with a winning idea here for white. So the first most tempting move in this position is bishop to c4, preparing to go bishop g8 and undermine the pawn chain. However, after bishop c4, black can simply block with bishop d5, and after our bishop retreats, black's king is going to enter the position on the dark squares and take all of our pawns, and this should be a win for black. So going back to the starting position, again we'll notice the common theme that our pawn is all the way on the h6 square. So this pawn, if the h7 pawn weren't there, would be very close to promoting. So if we can find a way to remove the h7 pawn, then this position will be a win. And this leads us to white's winning idea in this position, which is bishop to h5. This is a slightly more complicated version of the last sacrifice, as we're not actually taking the g6 pawn, we're just offering for it to take our bishop. So okay, black has a couple of options here and we'll go through all of them. The first one is if black takes the bishop And white goes g6 now. It's the idea of sacrificing another pawn. Now, if black doesn't take the pawn, white will capture on h7 and queen on the next turn. And if black does capture the pawn, then white will play h7 and queen on the next turn. So capturing the bishop is a very easy win for white. So let's say instead black ignores it and tries to bring their bishop around to defend the end of the pawn chain. And black plays bishop d5. And now let's say white captures the pawn. Again, if black captures, we're going h7 because this bishop does a poor job of defending the queening square. So it takes h7 and h8 will be queen. So let's say again, white ignores the bishop and defends the important h7 pawn. Now again, white will play bishop takes f5. And first of all, white's won 2 pawns, so this is already very good progress. But to make a bad situation worse for black, after king d6, g6, captures, bishop captures, and king e6. Now after h7, black is forced to give up the bishop, or white's pawn will simply queen. So bishop takes, and bishop takes. And now white's up a full bishop and a pawn, and this is easily winning. So this is a very important tactical resource. When your pawns are far up the board, oftentimes you can sacrifice a piece on g6 and queen the pawn. So thank you for watching and goodbye.